Welcome to HIV The Morning After. I'm Dan Hall. I'm a documentary producer and director. I've spent my entire adult life watching ignorance and prejudice play out around HIV. And frankly, I'm tired of it. And I'm sure many of you are too. This podcast is an attempt to do something about that. Not through lectures or statistics, but by doing what I do best. Interviewing people and letting them tell their own stories. Real voices, lived experiences, no bullshit. These conversations matter, and if you think so too, please rate, review, and share HIV The Morning After. I can make these episodes, but I can't make people listen to them or find them on their algorithms. That bit's down to you. You can reach me at hivthemorningafter@gmail.com. Right then, let's get started. Today I'm speaking with Alexander Cheves, an American writer whose erotic memoir, My Love is a Beast, won the 2022 Jeff Main's Nonfiction Prize, and it did so for its unflinching honesty about sex, identity, and living with HIV. But Alexander's story challenges much of what we expect to hear from long-term survivors. Diagnosed at barely 21 during university in the American South, he fell into a depression so severe that he nearly didn't survive it. This was followed by a period of manic sexual behaviour that he spent years trying to make amends for. Now, living in Berlin and writing columns for Out magazine, Alexander's work asks uncomfortable questions about what really threatens gay men's survival when HIV itself becomes manageable. Alexander Cheves, it's genuinely fantastic to have you on the show. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you so much, Dan. It's so cool to be here.
Now, for those of us living here in the UK who might not have much of a perception of the American South except what we see in Hollywood movies, can you give us a rough idea of what it's like?
Well, the farm is 500 acres. It's in the middle of nowhere. There's nothing there unless, you enjoy guns and racism. It's this farm about 2.5 hours from Atlanta, and it's extremely isolated. We didn't have internet. We barely had cell phone service, and that was my home. And my parents were, like many parents in the Southeast, they were extremely conservative evangelical Christians, and in fact, it was such a big part of their lives that for a rather large period of my childhood, my parents were missionaries. And so we lived in Zambia, Africa for several years and did missionary work. And so I didn't really even come back to the States until getting into high school.
And what did that feel like? Or were you in a situation where you didn't know any different, and so it was fine?
It was a surprise when I went to college and learned that most people didn't live this way. Most people didn't grow up this way. The only websites that had gay content that would pass my parents' very stringent Christian parental blocker on our dial-up computer at home was city websites and history websites. So I would search for gay and it would ping my dad. and then the only thing that came through the blocker were essentially history articles about AIDS. And so I went to college in 2010, the year Grindr hit the App Store, thinking that life beyond the farm was very much like 1985. And so I was terrified of HIV, terrified of AIDS. And I kind of still believed that gay culture primarily existed in the big metropolises and in these big cities like New York and San Francisco. And I had no idea that, the 90s had happened and gay men were everywhere. And then I went to college and it was quite a shock.
I gave a speech earlier this week for World AIDS Day at Goldsmiths, which is a college here in London, for a World AIDS Day event. And in my speech, I said that from my own personal experience, so I was born in 1973, but as I learnt about gay culture, even living in London, even being with very liberal parents, for me, gay life and gay death were the same thing. I was having to learn about both of them at the same time.
Yeah. My image of gay life was wrapped up in gay death primarily because of my dad. in every conversation that we had about sexuality, before I ever even came out to him, he made it clear that choosing this quote unquote lifestyle meant choosing death. And I believed him. I mean, he was my dad, you know, he was a doctor. And so I remember at 16 choosing to come out under the assumption that doing so meant a young death.
Why did you do that? Was there a tipping point where you thought honesty or openness has just got to take priority?
That's a beautiful question, and it's actually something that I'm exploring in my second book a little bit. You know, I'll go ahead and tell you something that I do write about in the second book that I haven't really told anyone yet. When I was about 13 to 16, I wrote this poem on my computer, and I was smart enough to save it under a different name because I knew that my parents and my dad was sometimes going through my computer. They never found it, and unfortunately the poem didn't survive. That computer crashed when I went to college, and I didn't have it saved and all this stuff, and it was a great tragedy. But I had written this at least 12 or 13 page poem, and maybe poem is the wrong word for it. It was more of like an ongoing dialogue with myself. And in the poem, I was really debating in real time with myself whether or not I should make this decision. Because if being gay meant dying young and staying in the closet meant long-term survival, that was the choice. Was it worth it? Should I? Shouldn't I? Could I? Did I have a choice? And I remember very clearly at 15, 16 years old with this kind of razor-sharp clarity, this brutal certainty that I should. And then that decision felt very clear and very conscientious because I knew I couldn't survive in the closet. Life was too painful. It was too awful. It was too stressful. And my dad had convinced me that by that point that I would not survive very long outside of the closet. So at 16, I believed that the only thing that mattered then was those few years that I would get once I left home and be able to sleep with boys and touch penises, and have this whole life that I wanted. And I chose it knowing it was brief, and that even though brief, it was worth it. Even though I think I made that decision based on faulty or maybe not entirely accurate information, it's one of the things that I'm most proud of. I'm so grateful that a 16-year-old made that choice because I don't know, it was such a great joy to get a little bit older and learn that actually isn't the case.
And I completely can connect with that. I remember listening when I was like 15 to a song called Hideaway by the band Erasure, which sings about basically coming out. And listening to that song and thinking, oh, I'm never going to have the courage to do that. But I know that my role in my life is to manage the closet as well as I can.
No.
And then I vividly remember about 1.5 years later, reading A Place I've Never Been by David Levitt, and suddenly realizing, oh no, it's a when and how conversation with myself now, rather than how am I going to manage the closet? It was like, when and how am I going to come out? And it felt liberating and frightening, but it sort of felt like my hand from the future inviting me into adulthood.
Well, that's beautiful, and I might be asking you for the names of these, for the name of this book again. It sounds lovely.
It's that difference, isn't it, between if you imagine being in the closet and sort of peeking through the gap, through the doors, a life you're never going to get, and then suddenly thinking, oh no, actually, these doors are unlocked. I've just got to push them open.
I've talked to so many gay men about this, and so many queer men, gay and queer men about this, and something really powerful happens the moment that you realize, that you accept that the closet is not endurable. Let that be a testament to how awful the closet is, that we literally choose shorter lives, or we think we're having to choose shorter lives in order to get out of it. I don't know if I've ever found the words to convey just how miserable the closet is. And I hope that younger generations don't have to experience it to the same degree that I did. But, if I had to describe it, especially because I lived with a very religious, very conservative family, I knew that coming out was going to be awful. I knew that it was going to be not just one fight, but many fights, endless fights. And it actually was worse than I could have ever imagined it would be. And even so, the closet itself, living in the closet, that daily stress, that daily dread, will my dad find a note in my pants pocket today? Have I deleted all my tabs online? Have I checked all my pockets? Have I behaved in a certain way that makes them not question? Have I given any signs? This daily, constant anxiety that something's going to slip, it is not endurable. It is suffering. And when we realize that, and we realize that you just can't suffer forever, that's when the magic happens. That's when they're at the choice that you just described, which is when and how.
So you go to college. What was it like being in a space where suddenly you didn't have to empty your trouser pockets at the end of each day to make sure you cleansed them of the queerness or make sure that you closed all your tabs? You know, what did that feel like going into that liberated space? Or was it liberated even?
Yeah, I mean, it was a art college, so it was a
So pretty liberated.
Yeah, yeah, it was very liberated. I mean, it was Savannah, Georgia, and so it was only 4 hours from home, which is one of my parents' requirements. They kind of believed, as I think parents trick themselves into believing, that, you know, if I wasn't very far from home, they would be able to, you know, check in on me. When, of course, 4 hours away from home is like pure ultimate anarchy, right?
Yeah, it could be. It's 4 hours from home and 30 years.
Yeah. I mean, I did exactly what my dad feared I would do, what any sheltered kid would do whose parents haven't taught him about safe sex or how to live healthily, how to protect himself. I went crazy. I had sex with everything that moved. I knew nothing about safe sex, and my parents hadn't taken the time to teach me any of this stuff, so I had to learn from a few lovely gay elders who kind of took me under their wing. And I made a lot of mistakes, you know. I was in and out of the student health clinic all the time. And, you know, in hindsight, it's no surprise that I tested positive at such a young age. I mean, I tested positive at 20 because it was the Deep South, and no adult, including my parents, ever sat down with me and said, this is what you do. This is how you take care of yourself. Nobody did.
And so what year is it that you test positive?
So that would have been 2013.
Okay, so we're a good 1.5 decades through into combination therapy. So treatment is outstanding. But what made you go for that test? Were you symptomatic?
In hindsight, I realized I was symptomatic. I remember going with my family on a trip that summer to some theme park, like, you know, Disney World or whatever. And it was for my sister's birthday. And I remember my body being so exhausted that there were moments I wasn't sure I could make it up a set of stairs. And honestly, the only thing my mom thought to do was to just fill me up with Diet Coke. She thought I was just really, really tired. And so I remember just drinking like Diet Coke after Diet Coke, and still I was falling asleep at 6 p.m. It lasted for months, and I thought, man, I'm just really fatigued. And then when I got back after summer break, one of my friends who had just come out to me himself, he didn't know where to go, and he had an STI scare. And by that point, I had been in and out of the student clinic multiple times, and so I knew exactly where to go. And he wanted somebody to go with him to get tested. He and I both got tested on the same day, and a few days later, they called him and saying everything was fine. And so he said, Alex, have they called you yet? And I said, well, no. I'm sure they will soon. And then the next morning, they called me, and, you know, they had told my friend's results to him over the phone. And so I said, look, you told my friend his results over the phone, so why can't you tell me mine? And they said, we're sorry, we can't. You got to come in. That drive to the clinic, when they repeatedly would not tell me what the results were, that's when I knew.
And how did that make you feel?
Oof. Well, I mean, you've read the book. The 6 months after my diagnosis were the 6 months of my life that were the hardest to survive.
For younger listeners listening to this story right now, can you give them an idea of what HIV diagnosis meant in the sort of 2013s, around that time, which isn't that long ago?
Yeah. You know, they only had a limited number of single pill regimens at the time. And the working theory was that I was an immature kid and would not have very strong medication adherence. And so they did not want to put me on a combination pill because the fear was that because there weren't many, if I developed drug resistance to one, I would develop drug resistance to all of them. And so originally they had me on a multi-pill regimen. It wasn't a death sentence. It was, there was medication, but now there's so much medication, right? There's so many different kinds of meds that they have out now. But this is pre-PrEP, this is pre-U equals U. This is before we knew that undetectable made you non-transmittable. This is before that was really, really widely talked about. And so the first thing the doctor told me was, you have to start doing this full heavy business of disclosure to everybody because it's your responsibility to take care of everybody you have sex with. And if anything happens, it's on you. It was terrifying. I was aware that I was lucky because I was testing positive at a time when there was good medication that had minimal side effects. I was also, in the same breath, aware that I was dangerous to everybody that I had sex with from this moment on, and that there was nothing that they could do to protect themselves, because this is really before PrEP was widely talked about or even known about. And I was aware that I could fuck it up. If I didn't take these pills, if I didn't, this pill was precious and rare, and if I didn't adhere to it perfectly, I could somehow negate the whole thing. And also the location where I was in, I was in the deep South, I was in Georgia, and it's a highly conservative, extremely religious culture down there. It still is. I went from being somebody who was a confident young kid in college to having no sex partners and nobody who would touch me. And this is before Grindr had a feature where you could disclose your status on your profile. You actually had to message people and tell them. And nobody wanted to have sex with an HIV positive kid.
Can you tell me, what is that like when nobody wants to touch you?
You have to find the ones who are more familiar with HIV. And so almost overnight, all my sex partners ended up being 10, 20 years older, men who didn't need this full disclosure, this education. That was the first time in my life that I realized that I needed my elders. For sex, for education, for community. I needed, nowadays we would say daddies, but I just needed older gay men. I didn't need my peers. I didn't need the guys at the bar. I actually needed gay, older friends. And these are the men that saved my life.
And you've written in your book about the depression that you fell into following your diagnosis. For all the goodwill in the world from all these older gay men, it's impossible to rescue someone really from depression. They have to pull that out themselves. And we all of us have our own different visions of what depression is, or different experiences of what depression does to us. What did it do to you? What did it look like?
As I write about in the book, and this was something that we really debated whether or not we should include in the text. I went through a very manic sex period, and what that means is, Grindr back then was relatively new. Grindr only started the year I went to college, and so it was the only app. I was strategic. I was aware of what I was doing. I wouldn't give anybody my name. I wouldn't give anybody my number. And this is before I was on meds, and so I was highly infectious during this period, and I just went on an absolute sex spree. And I don't really know why. I wish I could explain it in a way that makes me look better than I was or better than I am, but I mean, there was deceit, there was lying, you know. I wouldn't give out my number, I wouldn't give out my name, and I was having sex with somebody every day, somebody new every day. I don't know who I infected or if I infected anybody during this time, and I'll likely never know. But it was just this sort of mad burst of intense sexual activity.
And I imagine the context in which this is happening is you've been given some incredibly traumatic news, and society, family, the college, all of it hasn't given you the tools over the years to be able to process something like this.
Yeah.
You know, you don't have the skills, you don't even have the mental cognitive abilities, because there hasn't been the training, there hasn't been the education, there's not been the sense of acceptance in a community. So, and it's something, it just makes me think when I hear you tell this story, is it just feels like someone desperately trying to react to complex and distressing things they found out about entirely on their own.
Yeah. I mean, it's something that I've really tried to understand in the years since, and something that I guess I've tried to atone for and just teach people about. When I was writing for Plus magazine, which is a big HIV magazine out of the US, I once spoke with a infectious disease specialist who at one time worked for the CDC. And apparently this kind of response to an HIV diagnosis is statistically quite common. I thought I was the only one ever who might be committing such a transgression, but apparently it's so common that it's something that experts look out for. It's something that testing centers watch out for. It's something that is like, it's a known response to an HIV diagnosis. When I first wrote about it, when I wrote about it in my book, I got so many messages from people who told me that they responded to it similarly.
And this is in your essay Thursday.
Yeah. I think I had mentioned it in an earlier piece for The Advocate or Out magazine that probably didn't make a very big splash. But the only time I really wrote about it very, truthfully and confessionally, kind of told everything about what I did, is in the book in Thursday.
And so what was the tipping point for you that changed your state of mind to being one of sort of confusion and nihilism to almost going incredibly far the other way and going out into the world and wanting to heal it with your knowledge and your experiences and your thoughtfulness?
Well, I don't know if I went from nihilism to wanting to heal the world in quite such a quick fashion. I honestly just, God, it's almost cliche to say this, but something just kind of switched. Like I realized I wasn't going to die, and I got meds finally, and suddenly I just had this kind of moment of realization where I realized what I was doing, and I realized that I was putting people in harm's way, and I felt horribly bad, and I just stopped. And I stopped sex. I stopped all sex for a little bit, which, is recommended kind of while you figure it out. I had already done sex work by this point, and so not only do I have no idea where or how I got HIV, most people don't. I mean, it very well could have come from a client, but I had been meeting clients already by this point, and I started at 19, and so after some adjustment period, I know that I saw my first client post-HIV within the same year. I took a few months break, but then I kind of got back into it, and I would communicate my status and so on and so forth. And so the wanting to teach people and wanting to help people came quite a bit later. I spent almost 10 years as a sex worker, and at some point I learned that everybody has some pretty big traumas with sex and just doesn't know how to enjoy sex. And so several years later, when I moved to LA to write about sex for The Advocate and later for Out magazine, that's when the idea came to me to use my experience primarily in sex work to help if I could.
I remember very vividly, years ago, I dated a former sex worker, and it really stuck in my head. I remember him saying to me, in his experience, that people always thought that he was paid money to have sex. And he said, I'm not being paid money to have sex. I'm being paid money to go away.
Yeah. You know, most people just want to talk to somebody. I mean, it took me years to learn how to treat sex work like a business. And it took some really wonderful sex workers, actually mostly women. When I was doing sex work in college, it was me in a bar and somebody, typically an older man, who wants to have sex with me and then sweetens the deal right with some cash. I didn't see it as a business. I didn't see it as needing a profile or needing to do advertising or needing to, get paid a certain way. I didn't know it was illegal, to be completely honest with you. But over the years, over time, I learned, what websites you're on and how to get a deposit, how to get paid, how to configure your hours, how not to compromise on your rate and what kind of rate to have and what you offer and what your brand is and all that stuff. And it's just a business. And I was really good at it. And as I got better at it, I learned that there are so many men who are unspeakably alone, who feel all but forgotten by the modern day gay community and ignored. And their only recourse to beat the loneliness is to pay somebody like me for it. And it's a great tragedy of our culture because, think of the ages of these men. Think of the reasons why they've abstained from sex for so long, why they're just now exploring it. These are the men who lost everybody. They're the men who remember the darkest years of the plague, and they are all but abandoned by our community. And those were my clients. I got to know them very well and cared about them very deeply.
It's going slightly off topic here from the podcast, but I completely agree with you. And I'm mindful of something that is written in The Velvet Rage, which he says, as a community, when we walk into a room, don't let's only talk to the people we want to fuck.
Yeah.
And I think we're terribly guilty of doing that. I know I've been guilty in the past.
Yeah. And also, I'm so sorry for rambling off topic. Please feel free to butt in and steer me back to the right course.
No, it's not off topic at all. I think it's really interesting. In fact, it brings us perfectly on to the next point. And I think loneliness very much plugs into this. And that is the conversations that you've had where you've talked about how the biggest threat to your health following diagnosis hasn't been HIV itself, but a culture of sex and drugs. And I think certainly where I live here in London, there's a huge propensity to chemsex sex around here in this neighborhood. Yeah. And I don't think it's to do with horniness. I think it's to do with loneliness.
I think that's really profound, and I completely agree. I think you and I both are conscientious enough of how to make statements about the community to not say that there's something endemic, something wrong with gay men. I completely reject, what's the phrase, pathologizing an entire populace of people. But the statistics are pretty consistent. Gay men have a much higher likelihood of substance abuse disorder. We have higher rates of alcohol consumption. We have poorer rates of sobriety, management or resistance once we even start trying to manage these things. And I think it's rooted in so many things. I think that gay culture tends to be fostered and built and discovered and created in spaces of consumption, like bars and clubs. And I think it's a side effect of intense societal trauma. Of being less than 5% of the total population. I think it comes from isolation and loneliness.
And how do you feel you've managed to navigate that? How have you managed to come out the other side of it? Or are you still very much in it?
I work adjacent to nightlife here in Berlin, and I have a long history with drugs and partying and clubland, and my life is very healthy and very managed now. I'm very grateful to say, and that took a lot of work. But I also know that I'm never going to entertain the idea that it's just far away and taken care of and distant. I am actively involved in gay culture, and so it will always be this thing that I have to figure out, to manage, to figure out, to manage my relationship with. You know, I had my methy years, and the most important thing I did was, once I moved to New York, and this was pre-COVID, so I had a brief, really intense sort of bingey sex few months, and realized that New York would kill me if, sex in LA and sex and drugs and chemsex in Los Angeles and San Francisco and Atlanta, that was a lot. But man, New York, something about doing it in New York City was the moment where I decided, you know what, this is something I should take care of. So I got a therapist at GMHC and ended up having two therapists at Gay Men's Health Crisis in New York, who were not focused on sobriety. They were focused on moderation therapy and harm reduction. Although I think they profoundly changed my life, it wasn't just that, because by that point I had also been doing daily meditation I started daily meditation when I tested positive. And so by that point I had been doing it for several years. And honestly, if you really want the honest answer, I took a few really intense psychedelic trips. And somewhere between those three things, and I'm never going to say that it was just one of them, but somewhere between having a good therapist, daily self-work, daily meditation, and some really intense magic mushroom trips, I don't know, something clicked, something unlearned in my brain. And I realized that whatever connection had been created in my head to meth was not so strong anymore.
There's quite a complex conversation there, I think, because people are quite judgy.
I mean, let's look at the numbers. Think about the number of car crashes every year from alcohol. It's the most dangerous drug. It is the most abused, most dangerous drug. And crystal meth, I mean, it's actually kind of hard to OD on, think about all the people that overdose on fentanyl and heroin and opiates. The reality is that I am against this strange moral hierarchy that we have sort of, as a community and perhaps as a populace of people, decided is assigned to different substances and different drugs. Someone smokes marijuana every day and they're fun and cool and everybody loves a pothead, but if you're planning carefully managed Tina weekends every 2 months or so, you're skirting the edge of your life falling apart. And I don't know where this idea has come from. I don't assign any value judgment in my own personal ethics book to this drug or that. I think drugs they're part of life. And for many people, they've been the wellspring of creativity, and they're fun. There's a reason, we just need to say that. The reason why we do them is because they're fun. They're beautiful. They have beautiful experiences. With every drug, there is a point where it becomes too much. And that point will look different for every person. And I found a relationship to drugs that for me is healthy. And, it's not one of abstinence. I'm not sober. I'm probably never going to be sober in the, 12-step sense of the word. But my relationship to drugs is healthy now. It feels like I get what I need out of it, and I can say when it's time to, put it away. Once the relationship is healthy with it, I don't feel like I'm in danger of them anymore.
And you've emerged out of these situations in a very positive state, but that's not always been the case, has it? There have been people in your life who haven't managed to emerge out of these crises quite so well.
Yeah. Between writing about sex and being involved in nightlife for even just the the amount of time that I have been. I mean, just being a gay man in a more hedonistic world, my version of gay life will always be the more hedonistic side of it. And the list now of friends with black hearts next to their names in my phone, in my contact list, is quite long now. I mean, some people, I'm grateful that I figured it out. And there's so many that didn't. And the thing is that I don't know what separates me from them. Or if anything, that's the thing, is I don't know if anything separates me from them. It's chance. Some people live on the other side of that dark place where they will never get it together. They just can't come back from it. And in the beginning, we were the same kinds of people. We liked the same music, liked the same kind of sex. And they're in a different place now. And it's going to be very hard for them to ever come back. And I'm not. And I wish I knew the formula, the secret that made some people sort it out and some people don't. But, specifically, this is someone that you and I have talked about before. I had a friend in Atlanta who was in every way like me. He was kinky and sexually active and adventurous. And he's gone now. He died because he caught HIV and was into bug chasing, and he got it. So the bug chasing was successful, and he didn't go in and get treatment. When I heard about that, it broke my heart so much, because it was such a preventable death from someone that everybody loved. And if he had just talked to me, I would have said, babe, I'm never going to shame you for being a bug chaser. I'm never going to shame you for your erotic life. I'm never going to shame you for a fetish. Yeah, it's an extreme fetish, but, I'm into fisting, whatever, it's a fetish. But, okay, you're here now. Now let's get you meds. Now let's get you a long, full life on the other side of this infection. I could have just, and I don't know if he had anybody in his life to just do that. I don't know if he had anybody in his life to tell him that there's no shame, but let's take care of you. And he's gone.
For people who don't know, could you explain what bug chasing is?
Yeah, it's one of the, I guess, one of the most contentious topics among HIV positive people. It is the phenomenon of HIV negative people having a erotic, fetishized fantasy of getting HIV. And so they either legitimately have just the fantasy, where they fantasize about getting it, but they don't actually want to, or for many of them, they actually actively seek HIV and try to get it from HIV positive partners. I've met HIV positive people who claim that the entire existence of bug chasing and bug chasers is an overblown myth, and that it's not true and that it's not real. And that is patently false. I have personally encountered and worked with and spoken with so many bug chasers. I get messages from so many bug chasers. So they are real. It's a real fetish, and it's a real community. And there's a lot of men out there who eroticize catching HIV.
I remember speaking, admittedly not so much so recently, but I remember 10 years ago speaking with guys who I would now define as bug chasers. And a lot of the time, the reasoning I was told is, I'm going to get it anyway.
Yeah.
So I want to catch HIV under my terms and under my conditions and wrap it into an experience of my choosing.
Yeah, I think, I think there's a real psychological mechanism by which a crippling fear of something, if something is simply non-endurable, if something is simply so horrifying, you almost crave the relief of just it happening. And I'll be the first person to admit that once I realized that I have HIV and I'm gonna take a pill to treat it, yeah, the fear of it did go away because I was terrified of HIV, and then I got it, and then it was one less thing I had to spend daily stress worrying about or thinking about every time I had a hookup. So, I get it. I get wanting to relieve yourself of the anxiety of something by simply just making it happen.
And I'm very much with you. It's not for me to have judgment on this because I believe very strongly. And this also actually plugs into the period of your life when you were having lots of sex and not disclosing your status. I very strongly believe that my sexual health is my responsibility. Unless I'm sexually assaulted, I do not understand how anybody else can be responsible for passing anything on to me.
And I think that's a really powerful point. That point runs counter to the way that a lot of people are first educated about their own HIV, right? And crucially, I think it's a point that has become easier to argue in the age of PrEP. Because PrEP is this amazing thing that now gives the uninfected, the HIV negative, an incredible amount of power and ability to protect themselves. Legally, however, in HIV law all over, certainly all over the US, and I don't know how it is in the UK, but in the US, the law hasn't caught up to this amazing new medical technology. The law still overwhelmingly penalizes HIV positive people in the case of an infection. This idea that in a sexual encounter, if an infection happens, that it is always the full brunt and responsibility of the infected person is still a very present bogeyman in our legal system and in our culture. We assume that if you have something, it's your duty to inform and keep everybody safe. But, everybody has agency in sex. Everybody makes their own decisions and everybody's a willful partner.
Just to make sure I understand this correctly, and I've heard this before, and I can't quite believe this. If I'm having consensual sex, so I'm not living with HIV, and if I have consensual sex with someone who is living with HIV, and then through my choice of the type of sex that I have with them, I contract HIV, that is always their fault in law, even if they have told me everything, even if I've said, no, bareback me, I want you to come beside me, I want you to do all this, and they're like, I'm not sure I should. Yes, please do it. It's still the other person's fault in law.
Yes, in fact, there have been, I'm not going to be able to point to specific legal cases now. I've read about them and they are incredibly infuriating. I was briefly on the board of ACT UP in New York, and we actually talked about this quite a bit. There are cases where boyfriends who later broke up used the law as a kind of revenge vendetta against their exes, claiming that they got infected, and they had multiple rounds of sex. They were like, the law has been weaponized in encounters just much like the one that you described, because it still puts the onus, the responsibility on the infected person. And I'm sorry, but in a jury of posphobic, homophobic peers, if this is ever taken into a court of law, the social fear of the dangerous HIV positive person is still so strong and so present that I'm certain that any good lawyer can convince a homophobic jury to blame it all, to lay it all at the feet of the HIV positive partner.
I just think that's insane.
Insane.
I don't feel and have never expected anyone to disclose their status to me, who I'm going to have sex with, because I just keep coming back to the same point. I am responsible for the sexual health of my body. And if I want to have bareback sex, it's because I want something. Do you know what I mean? It's like, if that's me choosing to take that risk. Yeah. I don't understand why my choice and my risk. I don't understand why we are not responsible for our own bodies. If we're forced, then that's sexual assault. That's something completely different.
Yeah.
And I've been there where I've had unsafe sex way before PrEP, way before PEP, because I was just so horny and I just wanted that connectivity. I don't see why my desires and my wishes and my behaviors can ever be somebody else's responsibility. That just makes no sense.
It's not really something I write a whole lot about anymore. I mean, it's a fight that I'm not sure anybody really outside of like old school AIDS activists. And it's a fight that I'm not sure anybody really cares about anymore, you know, but those laws are still in place and they are still real and they are still, we're still at risk of criminalization, you know? And I don't believe that it has the kind of galvanized support or even awareness to change anytime soon. HIV criminalization laws are one reason why I fell so hedonistically and freely into wild sex and bareback culture post-HIV. Because the beautiful thing about bareback culture, the beautiful thing about the wilder, more hedonistic side of gay life, the parties, the drugs, and so on, when you go to a bareback party, when you go to a all bareback like communion party or whatever, the great thing about them is that they espouse the virtue that you just described, that you just put so eloquently, in that we're all responsible for our own bodies, and by being in a all bareback space, we're all equally implicated. Blame becomes irrelevant. If you're going to this bareback party and you're having sex with 20 people, you don't know whose status is whose, and nobody has this big disclosure moment. Like you're just all there. You're all sharing responsibility. You're all sharing blame. And there's something about that space that renders HIV status kind of irrelevant. And I found when I was young and new to my status, I found that very empowering and very beautiful and very healing. It was nice being in a space where my status, which people were still terrified of, you know. It wasn't until PrEP that people kind of started being a little bit less afraid of my status. And so before enough people knew about PrEP or were on PrEP, bareback culture in San Francisco and LA was great. It was kind of the safe space, right? It was where I didn't have to sit down with every single person and say, hey, just so you know, I'm HIV positive, I'm on meds, don't be afraid, you know? And I'll be honest, I haven't had a disclosure conversation in ages. I can't even remember the last time I told somebody about my status because I'm undetectable and I'm on meds and now I kind of assume that everybody has their own agency, you know?
And I remember a friend of mine who's living with HIV a few years ago calling me out for putting my HIV status on my Grindr account, because he said it's fostering a culture where people need to disclose. And he said, and also in the kind of top Trumps world of gay world, you're effectively saying, I'm better than that other person on the square next door to me.
Yeah.
That wasn't my intent, but I just hadn't seen it from that perspective. If people really want to avoid any risk, they should just not have sex. But if they do choose to have sex and they do choose to get their dick sucked or they do choose to get fucked, that needs to be on them.
Yeah.
Oh, I tell you, you got me on my high horse now.
I like your high horse. It's a good thing I think it's a really important subject to be talking about. And honestly, not enough people are.
At the start of this, you talked about how you felt that there came a point where you just had to come out of the closet and you knew in your mind, it's going to mean I die young, but I'm just going to have to do it. The need to come out is so strong, but I'm just going to have to take the sacrifice of an early death for my truth and my honesty. When did that point come when you started to think, oh, actually, maybe I'm not going to just die young?
Well, I just finished an essay about this for book 2, so this is very timely.
Can I just say that I'm not secretly editing Alexander's second book?
Yeah. Wow. This has been the best promo for book 2. You know, another thing that my dad said, which I do mention in the first book, but which I'm going to write about a little bit more in the second one. The night that I finally told my dad, you know, I'm going to stay this way and I don't care if it means I die young. He had always said that being gay is linked to AIDS and being gay is linked to AIDS. But that night he looked at me in my bedroom, kind of towered over me, this angry, short little man, and said that when I said yes, and I don't want to stop, I don't want to change, he said, well, you'll die of AIDS before you're 30. And, I'll never forget that line. It's a horrible thing for anyone to say to their child. I was barely 16. I'll never forget the look in his face when he said it, just this absolute disgust, horror. And so that 30 deadline existed in my mind for so long. And, when I was 29, I was living in New York and I had become a fully grown, sexually active, healthy man, who had a job and a gym membership. And every sign pointed to me turning 30 and surviving. But for those last 6 months, my irrational teenage mind kicked on, and I was looking for every possible way that I might die. Because the universe does things like that, right? Sometimes events just line up where your dad's prediction comes true. And I felt convinced that I was going to be walking through Soho one day or something, and somebody's grand piano would snap and I'd fall and get crushed by a piano. And when I survived past 30, and my dad's prediction didn't come true, I had this weird moment in life where I was like, oh, holy shit, I've never envisioned what I would do if I survived it. I don't have a long-term plan. I don't have a savings. I don't have a vision of my life that extends past 30. And the great irony is that 30, gay men talk about 30 like gay death or twink death, right? Leading up to that birthday, all my friends were like, oh, gay death. And I was like, you have no idea, And so
try 52.
Right. And now I'm past 30 and life has only gotten better. And I feel so lucky that I made it past 30. I mean, man, 30s are great. But I think every generation afterwards is great. I've interviewed gay men over 50, and I've interviewed gay men of all different ages and about their sex lives. And interestingly, I found out that gay men in their 50s report the highest satisfaction with their sex lives.
Yeah, that's absolutely true.
Is that
in my experience? Totally.
It's amazing. So actually, the great lesson is that I only have more to look forward to, and there's just more. What a wonder that I get to have it. The people who are the reason why I have, oh my God, I'm going to start crying. The people thanks to whom I have these meds and didn't make it past 30 and didn't get to see all this great wonder and change. And, it's all thanks to them. And then what a great joy to realize that on the other side of gay death, there's just like more life. It's so cool. And, after my 30th birthday, so much happened. I had just published a book. I was living in New York, and I decided to leave the city. I decided to uproot my life and move to Berlin because guess what? There's more life on the other side of that birthday, and I get to live it. And one benefit of sex work is that I learned that, sex is great, but it is not this great, it's not this great mystery that I once believed it was. And it's not as important as so much energy and attention and media in the world gives it. It's, sex is a great way to spend a Saturday night, but
well, so is watching the Golden Girls.
Yeah, so is watching the Golden Girls. So is a great meal. I if anything, being very, very sexually active and at a very young age for a very long time and developing a high degree of sexual, what would be the word? Sexual literacy, sexual experience. If anything, it's allowed me to see sex within its context. The most intense, hardcore sex I've ever had is not necessarily the best sex. Sometimes the best sex is just cuddling, To tell you the truth now that I no longer am a sex worker and I'm just kind of having sex as a regular person, I'm not this hypersexual maniac like I used to be. People read my work, people read my stuff and they think that I'm some kind of sex demon who's like fucking something every 3 hours. And, I'll get messages from people on Instagram like, when was the last time you had sex or fisting? And I'm like, oh, I don't know, 2 weeks ago. Like, I'm just,
people just message you that
all the time. Oh, I get so many sexual messages all the time because somebody read an article or something like that. And I'm like, man, if you had any idea, I am this boring Mr. Rogers gay man. I go to the gym and read books and do my little job. And, I'm just this, like, I'm boring and quiet. I'm not this, like, sex demon that I think I have at times portrayed myself to be in some of my work. At least not anymore.
But also I think maybe people are inspired or find it joyous that you have not been, or you've not allowed yourself to be in a situation where a majority culture says to you as a man living with HIV, oh, you should be ashamed of your HIV and you should be ashamed of the type of sex that you have that allowed you to acquire it. I think often there can be so much shaming that goes hand in hand, speaking to friends and speaking to guests on here. And I think in a way, maybe part of the loveliness about the positivity with which you write about sex is that you're just completely dispelling that shame and you've just got no time for it.
I do have no time for it. I once got into a heated conversation with a social scientist, so somebody who has a very high knowledge of social communication and culture, and she earnestly believed that there's such a thing as good shame, that there's a degree of shame that's necessary for the world to run. And and I'm not a social scientist, but on principle, I completely disagree. I believe that shame is always a disease. It's always a sickness. It only causes harm and it kills people. Our biggest enemy is shame. It is the thing you have to fight. And it's a tricky one because I don't know any way to beat shame except that it's solved somewhere in the self relationship. It's that magical moment where you realize that you have to actually relate to yourself, that you are a relationship in your own life that you have to make work, and you kind of have to love this person even with all their quirks. Like I have to love Alex, and Alex is annoying sometimes. Alex is a high maintenance person to live with, like Alex has his issues, but my job in this life is to love this person that I'm in. And that has to come before every other job and every other responsibility because I'm the only one that can do it. And if I don't do it, I can't do anything else. And that is how you fight shame. Shame is just the absence of self-love. And once you have self-love, I mean, God, this is starting to sound really woo-woo and hooky and like hokey, but it is true.
And so what would this Alexander Reeves speaking right now say to that Alexander Reeves who is almost on autopilot driving to the doctors to get a result that they already pretty much know what it's going to be?
Oh, my God. Well, I would tell him that it's going to be really, really hard. It's going to be awful. And I mean, it's going to be so awful that, he's going to barely survive it, but he will. And he will suffer. That's life. But that's life. That's growing up. We do suffer. And life is this miracle spot between great joy and great suffering. And, I was really suicidal during those 6 months after I tested positive, and even a little bit longer. And I'm really grateful for that period too. I've battled depression on and off my whole life, but the very worst depressive episode was after I tested positive. And I was so depressed, in such a dark place, so suicidal, that I think I reached that mental place that, only other people with very severe depression have ever reached. And that is that very interesting place at which you have no emotional connectivity to life. And it just becomes something you can look at kind of coolly and coldly. It's something that you can weigh as if you would weigh buying this shirt or that shirt, right? And when I reached that point where the pendulum of living and dying could go either way, when I felt very neutral, I remember looking at life objectively and saying or thinking, okay, do I want this? Do I want to continue doing this? If I choose to continue doing it, I will suffer more. That's all but guaranteed. Life is suffering. There are going to be moments of pain. But I have, by that point I had 21 years. I have 21 years of data to show that there also will be moments of joy. There will be great food. There will be great sex. There will be great mornings. There will be great stuff too. So I either choose nothing or the possibility of wonder. And looking at life so coldly and so neutrally as just a collection of experiences, positive and negative, there are always going to be more positive experiences. And in my darkest moments, I've gone back to the clarity of that choice and reminded myself that, you know what, there's always going to be a really good meal right around the corner or a really good hookup, next weekend. I choose to stick around for those little joy moments. And that's living.
And I would tell it to people listening, if people want their own little joy moments, they really must buy your first book. It is an absolutely fascinating read. It's called My Love is a Beast. For those in the UK, you will need to wait about 2 or 3 weeks for it to arrive. I'll place a link to buy it directly from the publishers, but it is really, really good. Unfortunately, I'm going to have to buy another copy because halfway through my copy, I left it on a bus with all the good bits highlighted in pink. So someone's going to get an education.
Oh, that's great. I hope they love it. It's amazing.
And you have another book coming out.
Still working on it.
Are you able to give any hints away about what it's about or anything that could be featured within it?
Well, yeah. It's if the first book tackles the shame of sex and growing up, I really wanted to tackle mental health, depression, because I've met the most sexually hedonistic people on earth who still have a hard time talking about going to therapy and having depression. It's still this thing that men just have a really hard time, especially gay men. I think we in particular not only struggle with mental health in a very unique way, but we have a hard time talking about it. And I decided to tackle that shame instead of sexual shame in the second book. And of course there's sex in it because I'll always write about sex, but the sex is not, sexual development is not the focus of the second book. The second book is about now a grown adult man trying to be okay and how much of a personal daily struggle that is. And it's a struggle that I think most gay men can relate to.
And you said something that really struck me about 10 minutes ago about depression and this is exactly what my experience is like, that one knows you're sort of near rock bottom, not when you're gnashing your teeth and wailing and rolling your hands, but when you step outside your front door and you are consumed with ambivalence.
Yeah, when you're numb.
Yeah, and I've been in situations where I stepped out onto the road and a car's and I've just sort of thought, all right, there's a car there.
Yeah.
And it's a really odd feeling because before I'd been in those states myself, I always thought that real depth pit was wailing and gnashing of teeth and just rocking and crying. But actually it's not. It's far more pernicious than that. It's just this total disassociation. You ask for a flat white at the coffee shop and someone gives you a cappuccino.
Doesn't matter.
Doesn't matter.
Yeah.
I mean, that sounds like a petty example, but it is kind of like that.
Oh no, it's completely true. And I I've been having to really manage that, because I know I can go to that place, and I've been having to manage it really since, the war in Gaza, the darkening political climate of the United States. I mean, all this stuff is happening in the big world, the big world outside my little tiny world. And man, sometimes you turn on the news or turn on Instagram and it feels like, the world's ending and nothing matters. And it's doubly hard because if we're really going to slap a label on it, I am a nihilist. I don't think anything, I don't know. I don't believe in any objective meaning. I don't think all this is going to a point or purpose. But the great truth of life is that on the other side of nihilism is joy. You can live in that neutral, gray, flavorless version of the world for so long. I've spent months in that turned off, derealized sort of neutral space where everything's just numb and living and dying don't matter. But if you can, and I don't know, I don't always know the mechanisms on the way out of there, and I don't know if the beliefs that get me there necessarily change, but you can despair just as easily as feel wonder and awe. Because the world's not going to change, and the world hasn't changed, but there's still wonder and joy. And that's what I mean by on the other side of nihilism is joy, because there are no stakes. There's no way to fail. Life has no meaning, thank God. Like, we get to just kind of do it and enjoy it. And it's fun and strange and confusing, and it's beautiful because it's fun and strange and confusing. Whenever I get too stressed out and too much in that space, I think about black holes that, everything that I know will one day be swallowed in a millisecond to a black hole and nothing matters. And so if nothing matters, then there's no reason not to enjoy it.
But I think that an important thing for you to remember, and I should as well doing this podcast, we can't fix the world, and sometimes it can feel overwhelming to want to do that, but we can make efforts to make our tiny corners of them a bit better. And both of us do that. Me with my podcasts and my films, and you with your writing. We make people feel seen and people feel heard, and that's a hugely valuable thing to do.
Yeah, it's the small world. I call it the small world view. I can read the news. But I can't live my daily life in big world view because it's just too much, and it doesn't make me care less about the bigger stuff. But to get up and eat breakfast and do my life, I have to go in small world view, and that means that some days I can just love the 7 or 8 people I'm going to interact with on this daily basis. My whole world some days just has to be the walk between my home and my work in the gym. Some days my whole world is a span of a few kilometers or a few miles, whatever. And I can't fix the bigger things, but I can be nice to the person that I get a coffee from.
I totally agree with you. And, like one of the regular ways I do that every single day is when I'm in bed and I'm on Grind or I'm on Scruff, I will never, ever just go to sleep. Like every person I've been speaking to, I'll always say, right, I'm going to sleep now. Good night.
Yep.
But I always close the conversation down as a way of respecting that person. And it sounds like a tiny thing, but if I just vanish, which I know sort of culture on those apps, it's fine to do, but it just doesn't really feel very polite.
Yeah, it's not tiny, it's huge. That little bit of human care is what we pin our lives on those things. We don't actually pin our lives on these big things. I think we build ourselves from these little bitty tiny daily experiences. So I think that's quite huge.
And there is what was a very well-known HIV/AIDS hospice in West London called the London Lighthouse. And there was a garden there where the ashes of many, many people were scattered. The building itself has now been turned into a museum of brands, but they've kept the garden, and it's a very respectful and moving place to go to, and I would highly recommend going there when next you're in London.
Oh, wow.
But I'd like to take us in our heads to either that garden or any garden, a place of peace and remembrance, and ask for you to share with the people listening, who would you like us just to take a pause and remember with you on your behalf?
Oh, man. One of the most strangely profound deaths that I had to ever witness in my life was it was my friend Sean, actually. When I moved to Atlanta, I had no money, and I had this vague sort of tenuous setup for a job working for a sex toy company, and this gay couple who lived in the city gave me their spare room for like $300 a month. It was something absurd. Like it was no money. It had its own bathroom, you know, I could come and go as I pleased, and they did this for a lot of people. There were a lot of, you know, lost boys who at one point or another ended up crashing in one of their spare rooms. And, you know, at first glance, you'd think like, all right, this is going to come with sexual requirements or sexual expectations, or, you know, this can't just be a free room, because it so rarely is. And I lived with them for 3 years, and it actually was just a free room, or almost free room. It was a place. It was done fully out of love and care and for support, and they just wanted to give somebody that they liked a place of security. And then one day Sean got cancer, and they gave him about, I don't know, 12 months, and he lasted 6. I mean, it just went so fast. And he was young. He was in his 40s. He way too young. I've never lived with cancer so closely. I've never had anybody die on cancer before on me in the same house, and I watched it up close, and I watched how the community really came together in Atlanta, and how gay men, outside of clubs and parties, how they all started kind of taking care of each other and driving Sean to appointments, and it was one of the most brutal and yet beautiful experiences of my life to be there at the end. And, you know, people like that are how I lived. In every stage of my life, there's been an older gay man who gave me a place to stay, or gave me some advice, or gave me some counsel, gave me some help, gave me a career connection. We take care of our own, and Sean was one of many gay daddies who was there when a very lost little boy needed a place to stay. And so I would remember sweet, playful, silly, horny Sean, wherever he is right now.
If you could write a postcard to the world, what would you want it to say?
Oh my Lord. There's no more important thing you'll do in life than love yourself. God, I mean, you know, God, now it sounds so hokey, but yeah, try to reach that point where you look in the mirror and there's no one else you'd want to be. I think it's really hard for adults. It's really hard for adults to love themselves, and I think a lot of adults never get there. It's the most important. I don't know how you would phrase it on a postcard, but there's only one relationship that you have to make work in life. There's only one relationship that really matters, and it's your self-dance. It's your self-relationship, and give that more love.
Alexander Cheves, thank you so much for guesting on HIV the morning after. It has been fantastic to talk with you.
Dan, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much.
If you were moved or informed by what you heard today, please help spread the word. Subscribe to HIV The Morning After and leave a rating and a review. It makes a huge difference in helping others to find it. Your support helps to amplify these experiences. If you'd like to get in touch, suggest a guest, or share your own thoughts, you can email me at hivthemorningafter@gmail.com. And remember, if you encounter HIV stigma in a bar, call it out. If you encounter it at work, call it out. If you encounter it online, call it out. Because if you don't, you're part of the problem. The theme tune is by Paulie Nidu at unstoppablemonsters.com. And many thanks to Murray Lang for his continued support. And thank you for listening. Join me next time for another important conversation on HIV The Morning After. I've been Dan Hall.